Hello everyone, welcome to a new lesson. Today we're touching on one of programming's fundamental concepts, collections, specifically arrays in C#. Arrays are the most basic form of collection you can declare. So what do I mean by a collection? It's a group of elements of the same type stored together in a single variable. So for example, an int array holds multiple integers, not just one. You can imagine arrays like a street. You have multiple houses on the same street and each house has an address. In the case of arrays, these addresses are numeric and they start at 0. If you want to know why they start at 0 and not at 1, check the link in the description. If by the time you are watching this I will make the video explaining that subject, you'll find it there. So, if I were to declare an array of 5 elements, I would have a street with 5 houses. Their addresses starting at 0 and ending at 4. And each of these houses would contain what we want to put in that house, or in other words, the value to be stored. Hope this is clear so far. So let's see how we actually declare an array. Not much different than a regular variable declaration, right? Simply by placing two square brackets after the type, we are informing the compiler that we want a collection, an array of type int, not a single variable. We haven't learned about reference and value types yet, but arrays are reference types, and because of that you need to initialize them using the new keyword, like so. So, a new int array of 6 elements. This is the first important property of arrays that you need to know from start. Arrays are fixed size, so once you declare an array of 6 elements, it cannot be resized. I mean, it can, but in the sense of declare a new int array of the new size, copy all elements from the old array, and then delete the old array, which is not the same thing as just resizing, and is very inefficient. Can you imagine copying all the elements of a 100,000 elements array just to make it bigger by one cell? So because arrays have a fixed size, they must also know their size from the very beginning. This is the second important property of arrays. You cannot just initialize an array without specifying its size. The runtime must know from the very beginning how much memory it needs to reserve. This is one reason why arrays are a bit rigid and difficult to work with. The third important property is that arrays can only store elements of the same type, so you cannot do this. In recent versions of .NET, initialization has been simplified and standardized for all collection types, including arrays, so you can initialize them like this. What if you wanted to initialize an array directly with some values? Traditionally, you do it by specifying the value of its elements like this. Or a bit more simplified like this. With a new centralized syntax, it can be done like so. If you initialize an array and don't specify the value of its elements, its cells will be filled with the default of that data type, which is 0 for numeric types, false for booleans, null for reference types like strings, etc. Anyway, once declared and initialized, we can access the value stored at some array cell using its index, its 0-based address, like this. And it works. We can also modify that value the same way. Although you will rarely manually put values in an array cell by cell or read values the same way. Usually arrays are used hand in hand with loops, for and for each in particular. For each is easier and it should be preferred when you want to do something with all the elements of the array and you don't care about indexes like this. For is a bit trickier because remember we need to tell it from where to start and until where to count. So of course we start at 0, the address of the first element in the array, but until when should we count? How do we know how many elements the array has? For that, arrays have a special property called length used like this. Notice how I said I is less than length and not equal to length? That's because length will give us the number of elements in that array, so 5, because it counts them from 1. But remember, addresses of the cells of an array start at 0. Because of that, we need to tell it increment I from 0 to how many elements are in this array minus 1 to account for this difference between 0 versus 1 basis. Or in other words, increment I as long as it is less than the number of elements in this array, which in our case is 4. 4 is less than 5. So indeed, from 0 to 4 are the addresses of the array cells. If you try to access cells outside the range of the array, say you want to access a cell with address 10 but your array only has 5 cells, you will get a special kind of error called an index out of range exception. So be careful to only access addresses that exist, otherwise you will crash your program. Boom. We haven't learned about methods yet. In fact, this will be the topic of the next lesson. But if you write array dot, you will see a list of useful functions like the previously mentioned resize. In time, we will explore these too. Finally, you should also know that there are also multidimensional arrays where we have arrays with 2 or more dimensions, where, for example, when trying to store a chessboard into an array, each cell is identified both by a column and a row index. Also, we have arrays of arrays, also called jagged arrays, where each cell in an array is actually an array itself. But these are rarely used, so I will not present them here. Again, if by the time you are watching this I will have done the clip explaining these concepts too, you will find it in the description below. Regardless, that was all for today, and as you can see it was not that hard. Just imagine streets with houses that have numbers and you are done with arrays. In some future lessons we'll learn about other collection types, some more flexible than arrays. And as mentioned, in the next lesson we will learn about methods or how to group related codes into executable units of code. That will be pretty useful and awesome. So if you don't want to miss that, click the subscribe button and maybe the like one too. For now, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next tech frame.